all across America and around the world. This is Veterans Radio. This is Veterans Radio.
Good day. I'm Jim Fausone. I'm the officer of the deck today here on Veterans Radio, and thanks for joining us. We've got some interesting stories for you. We always want to remind you you can find more about Veterans Radio at its Facebook site or at the web, veteransradio.org, where we're on the web 24/7. You can find a lot of our podcasts there as well. We post new ones every Tuesday, so you can get a new story, a new interview, something you didn't know before by going to veteransradio.org. And before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. First up, we want to thank National Veteran Business Development Council, NVBDC.org. It was established to certify both service-disabled and veteran-owned businesses. You'll find out how they can help your business by going to NVBDC.org. We want to thank Legal Help for Veterans. Legal Help for Veterans fights for veterans' disability rights all across the nation. You can reach them at 800-693-4800 or on the web at legalhelpforveterans.com. And finally, PuroClean. PuroClean is the paramedics of property damage. It provides water damage remediation, flood water removal, fire and smoke damage remediation, mold removal, biohazard cleanup. It also has a focus on veteran franchisees. You can learn more about them by going to puroclean.com. We want to give you a little advance notice. We're going to have a Veterans Radio event on Sunday, September 28th, 2025. Radio on the River. We're doing a new location on Freedom River in Livingston County, Michigan. We want you to save the date. We're going to have veteran storytelling and guest speakers. We'll have raffle items, great local musicians and food. Also, uniquely, there's going to be an opportunity to fly in a UH-1 Huey from the Michigan Flight Museum. And maybe you can also win a free ride that way. But plan on supporting Veterans Radio either by buying tickets or sponsoring Radio on the River. Contact us at Dale@veteransradio.org or Jim@veteransradio.org to get more information, but we'd love to have you come out, and we'd certainly love to have you sponsor. We want to welcome to Veterans Radio today the president of the Call of Duty Endowment, Dan Goldenberg. Dan, welcome to Veterans Radio.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Well, let me set this up a little bit because first I should probably acknowledge that you are a retired Navy captain who brings 27 years of active and reserve military service to the table here, as well as more than a decade of business experience. And you are now the president and have been since, it's been 12 years or something, Call of Duty Endowment. So let's start with this. How did a nice kid like you end up at the United States Naval Academy and in the Navy for a career with some educational stops along the way at Harvard and MIT and the Air Command and Staff College? But how'd you get started in this mess?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I grew up in New York, probably about 10 miles from West Point, and my dad had been in the Army, so. After realizing the West Pointers were stealing all the best girls from my high school, I couldn't go to West Point and keep my self-respect. So I had to go to Navy. No, it's just, there were a lot of things pushing me that way, but the opportunities of the Navy, I wanted to be an astronaut. It seemed like the best place to go for that. Didn't quite work out, but it had a lot of fun along the way in the astronaut attempt. But it was just a wonderful experience. I always thought the Navy just offered the most options, and it's true. I got to do many, many interesting things. Don't regret a day of my service.
Well, your military highlights include 4 tours as a commanding officer, carrier-based naval flight officer, special assistant to 4 secretaries of the Navy. I mean, you had a great career, but you're now and have been for a dozen years now, a really interesting opportunity. What is the Call of Duty Endowment?
Yeah, so we didn't set out to be this, but we have become the largest funder of veteran employment in the country, in the US and probably in the UK as well. What happened was back in 2007, Bobby Kotick, who was the CEO of Activision Blizzard, had noticed that Call of Duty had rapidly become the company's flagship product, if you will, and it did and continues to do really well today. And he wanted to find a way to meaningfully give back to the community that inspired it, the veteran community, the military community. And Bobby was very into the arts, still is. And he approached the secretary of the VA at the time, a gentleman by the name of Jim Nicholson, and he said, Jim, like to create an art facility for veterans on the West LA VA campus. And if you ever met Jim said something to the effect of, Bobby, vets don't need freaking free art, they need jobs. He didn't use the word freaking. I think, like, to most people that would have been a turnoff. With the Bobby, that was a challenge accepted moment. And because a lot of the corporate efforts, a lot of the government, or all the government efforts, and most of the philanthropic efforts were failing in that regard. They weren't, not only were they not getting vets in jobs, they weren't getting them the high quality jobs, which really matters a ton. So the notion was we could take a private sector approach to this really, tough problem to solve and maybe get better results. And for the first 4 years, we did not. We did what a lot of companies did, which is write big checks, provide the big cardboard check recipient moment, photo op. And then the difference was nothing happened. I said 4 years, really 3 years of that. And in fact, across that time, our cost per placement was about the same as the Department of Labor's, and we'd only placed about 1,000 veterans in jobs. So the board of the endowment was very dissatisfied, and they said, look, there's got to be a better way to do this. And they looked for someone, that someone ended up being me, a veteran with business experience, to come in and see if we could create a better model. So we created a model. We collaborated with Deloitte to create this model to find the highest performing nonprofits out of the tens of thousands of veteran nonprofits that exist, to fund them, coach them, and help them grow. And that model is called the Seal of Distinction. And ultimately, once we implemented it, it led us to place 150,000 veterans in jobs. And last year, we did it at a cost 1/15 that of the Department of Labor. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of how it started, and it continues to run really well. It's all about, the vetting model of finding the high performers, and then the accountability model that's also part of what we do to ensure they deliver results for veterans.
Well, let's
not just numbers, but quality.
Yeah, let me dig deeper into those numbers, because I want to know, how is it that the organization's been able to assist in placing 150,000 vets in high quality jobs?
Yeah, so once we've identified we have this vetting model. It's real simple. It's about a page and a quarter of information from organizations. So we plug that into our Seal of Distinction model. We have an outside board of advisors who assess the responses. We usually pick the best 5 to 10, and then we hand them over. For years, we handed them over to Deloitte. Deloitte would then do an assessment. As one nonprofit called it, the business equivalent of a proctology exam, to really understand, can these organizations deliver? Can they be trusted? We look at, do their performance metrics ring true? Can we prove that they are in fact accurate? Background checks on their key employees. We do a historical, current, and future financial health check, and we do what's called a policies and procedures check. So those 4 things add up to our assessment of these organizations. If they come back green on all 4 areas, then it goes to our board for approval. If that happens, we give them a $30,000 unrestricted grant as an award, but more importantly, opportunity to get a much larger restricted grant. And our average grant size is probably around $800,000 a year per organization. So big opportunity. They in turn commit to certain placement goals, and we monitor them quarterly. And if they're hitting them, fantastic. If they're not, we have a conversation to understand why not, to try and diagnose. And if we can, coach them to get back on track. or provide them with the necessary resources, whatever it may be. If they can get back on track and hit their goal, great. If they can't, we move on and we work with someone else.
So you really, if I understand it, Dan, then what the Call of Duty Endowment is doing, it is focusing on.
Not exactly. No, it's actually the nonprofits that do the placement work. So you're partially correct in the sense that we work on, if you will, the supply and the demand side. The supply of job ready vets. We vet those nonprofits through our seal of distinction process that will do the counseling, the resume creation, the interview practice to get vets ready, the supply of job ready veterans. And then that's where most of our funding goes. We also work on the demand side, and we can talk about that more if you like, about encouraging companies to make high fit placements with veterans. But most of our work is actually on the nonprofit side, the counseling services for veterans. That's where the almost $100 million that we've put against the problem goes.
So you're funding the nonprofits who are helping the vets make that transition.
Yeah, and it makes a huge difference. Like, accountability drives performance at the end of the day. And, we see, the organizations we fund over time, we're very quantitatively focused, but qualitatively, we've seen these are the organizations who stick around, and our average grantee's probably been with us for about 8 years. So it's not like we're turning over the participants a lot. Most of them at this point are really hitting their commitments. But they're committed to constant improvement. They're open to new ideas and changing how they do business. They're very adaptable. And by the way, these are all things the federal government's programs are not. And that's a huge, huge difference between this nonprofit approach and the federal government like the Department of Labor's Veteran Employment Program gets the same money pretty much every year, despite the fact that performance generally declines, right? That's not okay. Our model is all about accountability.
And can you give us an example of a nonprofit organization that you've been working with, and so you can help us visualize, like, how does this work?
Absolutely. So we have 10 grantees we work with right now, 8 in the U.S., 2 in the U.K. I'll give you, our grantees serve the whole spectrum of veterans and transitioning service members, Guard and reservists. Just one thing we do not fund, we don't fund military spouse placement. It's just so we stay focused. It's an incredibly important and worthy area, but it's not what we do. Though many of our grantees do help with military spouse employment, we just don't fund that. But an example would be Vet Jobs. They're exceptional. They work with a large number of transitioning service members, veterans, and guardsmen and reservists. Their particular area of expertise, they'll help anyone, but is with the Guard and Reserve. They have very deep relationships and memos of understanding with many state guard bureaus and all the reserve branches. They're excellent and they get tremendous outcomes. Whereas you contrast that with, say, JVS SoCal, they're focused on really high barrier to employment veterans in Southern California. These are folks who may have challenges with mental health, addiction, criminal records, those kind of things. Across the board, almost 90% of those we place were enlisted when they left the service. So we're not cherry picking junior officers. If junior officer approaches one of our organizations for help, they'll get it, absolutely. But our focus is helping, like our key constituent is that E4, E5 coming out of the military, right? They're the ones who tend to need the most help. They also have a long runway career-wise ahead of them where they can benefit from these services.
Yeah, the enlisted folk don't have sometimes the education and certainly not the network, the business network, and thereby transitioning is so much harder and they need more help. Have you found over the dozen years or so that this approach is reaching more people? Or is it because we've finally ended the war in Afghanistan, you're starting to see that maybe the supply here of transitioning people is less?
No, it's unrelenting. The need is, if anything, is growing. And I think, look, we transition 200 to 250,000 folks out of the military every year, rain or shine, right? So the need is unrelenting. The market, the job market we're sending them into is constantly evolving. And unfortunately, government programs like TAP are not adapting to those needs. And so, if TAP was doing its job, if the military did as good a job transitioning service members as it does making them, there wouldn't be a need for us or our grantees. But unfortunately, that's not the case. When you bring 100 soldiers into a classroom, with one facilitator who maybe a month ago was wearing a uniform themselves, they're not getting the kind of customized counseling services they need. You really, as a service member, in almost every case, need help. And by getting help, even if you don't think you need it, you'll probably get the better outcomes. We know, for instance, that if you get help, professional help with two things, resume creation and interview practice, you're 3 times more likely to get a high quality job. That's not our data, that's Penn State's Veterans Metrics Initiative's data. You need, whether you know it or not, you need help with resume/LinkedIn profile creation and interview job practice. You get those two. There are many other things that go into the equation, but those two things really move the dial, and our grantees are superb at it. And the other thing I'll say is, no service member should ever pay for these services. That's our job. We do that.
Yeah, it's an incredible organization, Call of Duty Endowment, and what you're able to do because of the support of Activision Blizzard is amazing. And one of the things you said that I want to highlight, which is this is sort of customized help, right? Assistance. Different grantees, your nonprofits in different locales, probably have different challenges that the transitioning service member makes, and they can adjust to it because they're local. Again, a nationwide TAP program or something just probably isn't nimble enough or on the ground enough to really do that. Have you noticed the difference?
Yeah, you're 100% right, Jim. It's, the agility, one, because they're in local markets, two, they're constantly talking with employers. They have and at this point, they've placed in many employers, they've placed many veterans. So they're constantly in a feedback loop around the stuff. And here's the difference between them and, say, the Department of Labor's programs. They have the ability to adjust, right? Whereas the Department of Labor is under different kinds of constraints. Every congressman probably wants an America's Job Center in their district, whether they need it or not. And it's just a very inflexible architecture, right? Our grantees can redeploy resources, change the training, change the way they do resumes. I mean, I'll bet anything, the way that our grantees are using generative AI right now to help with this is probably, years ahead of DOL. DOL probably still hasn't figured out the legalities of how to use Gen AI yet. It's actually invaluable. It's just one example. So their adaptability is key, and their connection to employers and local market makes a huge difference.
Well, this sort of sets up the next two things I want to talk about that the endowment's been involved in that I want you to talk about. And the first is using data to measure veterans' economic health. I know this is something that's important to the endowment, and you've got some solution ideas, but that, actually that terminology, measuring veterans' economic health, I don't think I've read about that. I don't think I've heard people interested in it in that sort of holistic way. How did this come about?
Yeah, I'm so glad you raised that up. Not many people give me the chance to talk about this because it's a little wonky, but it's so important.
We love wonky on Veterans Radio. This is what our listeners want. They want a little more than what you get the headlines in the general press. So please expand.
The number that the politicians and most of the press focuses on is the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics number, veteran employment number. The problem, as the BLS economist told me himself, is it is a car that has been turned into a boat. That number was never intended to be used the way it is, and there's a lot of problems with it. And if you look at it from month to month, it's up, it's down, it's all over the place. It absolutely is a terrible measure of how veterans are doing economically for a number of reasons. One, the sample they use is not necessarily representative of the veteran population. Two, the question, and this might be the most important thing they ask you that determines the unemployment rate, is this: last week were you paid for work? Last week were you paid for work? If you answered yes, you're considered fully employed. So if you mowed your neighbor's lawn for $25, employed. 5 hours a week, 5 hours last week as a barista, fully employed. drilled in the Guard last weekend, but don't have a civilian job, fully employed. The other thing is they ask you, are you a veteran? And if you answer, there are many people who've worn the uniform who actually are veterans who don't identify as veterans. My dad was in the airborne. To his dying day, he said he wasn't a veteran because he hadn't been in combat. Combat experience has nothing to do with veteran status. But it's like, for all these reasons, it's a terrible. By the way, their insights, they go to the state level, but that's as far as they go. So, like, you can't tell from the government's numbers the difference between employment in Los Angeles and employment in San Francisco for veterans. It's not really actionable. So anyway, the question is there a better way? And the answer is yes.
Well, no, before you get to the answer, why would it be important to have more accurate measure of veteran economic health?
Absolutely. So you need something that's real time, accurate, and actionable. Real time, things change, right? We need to know within at least a couple of weeks what the situation is for veterans in the job market. 2, accurate. We're going to make investments based off of this, so it has to be right. And 3, actionable locally. So, not like down to the zip code or congressional district level. We need to know where the need is so we can deploy resources in the right place. And that's one of the problems with the Department of Labor's resources. They spread the peanut butter across the whole country, whether they need it or not, right? As opposed to deploying it to where the need is greatest. Anyway, that's why it's important.
Well, I want to expand on that a little bit as in Please. Some of your materials. Yeah. So much of what happens to veterans is sort of opinion-based. Well, I think they need this, and I feel they should have that. What you're trying to do is say, we really got to make this data-driven. So when we decide issues like, what do we do about employment for veterans in this region, or food insecurity, or even suicide prevention, you can dig deeper and find out, hey, here's a anomaly on veterans not being able to work or being fully employed. That's impacting these other policy decisions, but it's data-driven, not just feelings, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I need to take you on the road with me because you said it better than I can say it. That's exactly correct. And, even though the number one service transitioning service members request is employment service, less than 0.1% of the federal veteran budget goes to employment. Less than 0.1%. So if you talk about, deploying government resources to where they're needed using data, it's horrifically misaligned right now. And if you get it, the flip side of that is if you get it right, if someone quickly gets into a high-fit job coming out of the service or during a period of unemployment, their dependency on very expensive other government services like mental health, physical health, housing is reduced, right? There's a multiplier effect to getting this right. And no one has tied together that. No one's saying, look, if we just nail employment early in the transition process, it's actually going to reduce our costs elsewhere and free up resources to those who very badly need them.
Yeah, too much of the VA in particular is not focused on doing it right the first time because in the end, that's the cheapest, best way to go. But I cut you off. You said, hey, here's the problem, but there are some solutions. What does Call of Duty Endowment think about solutions?
Well, so one solution is super cheap and could be done very quickly. So there's 2 databases that come into play here. There's what's called the VADR database, VADR, which is a list of Social Security numbers for all of our veterans. The other database is the Social Security Administration's payroll database, also by Social Security numbers. You correlate, obviously respecting privacy and confidentiality within the walls of the government, you correlate those 2 databases, the weekly payroll database that anybody who's legally employed is part of, and the list of all veterans, and you actually know what every veteran in the country is making down to the zip code level every week. And boom, all of a sudden, this data exists. It's just correlating 2 data sets. Obviously, again, protecting privacy, but rolling this up in aggregate, you could create a heat map of the whole U.S. showing where the greatest need is, and it would be near real time. I mean, it would be at most a month time late, right? How much better is that than what we have right now?
So solutions which seem simple are almost always the best. This seems simple, Therefore, there must be huge impediments to implementing such a simple solution. What are they?
Well, that's the crazy thing. Everybody, we talk to senators, congressmen, their staffs about this. Everyone agrees like that's the right answer. And yet inertia is a powerful thing to overcome in the government, right? So, but because that's the way we've always done it, which is the worst. Like that's an answer that generally the commercial sector will get you fired.
Exactly.
But in the government sector, it preserves your job. So, but it's absolutely the right answer. We just need to bring the right folks together to accomplish it. So, I mean, it would just unlock so much value. By the way, like that's the kind of thing I wish Doja was doing. Right? Like this is a no-brainer. Cost neutral, in fact, cost savings
right.
and value enhancer, and yet it's still not being done. And I have no pride of ownership. I wish someone within government would run with us and make it happen, but it's the right answer.
Well, as I said, sometimes these simple and right answers are the hardest ones to implement. We're talking to Dan Goldenberg, who is the president of Call of Duty Endowment. He was also a retired Navy captain, spent 27 years in service, and another decade or so in the business world before coming to Call of Duty Endowment, where he's been for a dozen years. I want to switch topics, if I can, Dan, staying with some of the work that's Call of Duty Endowment's doing, but moving to a report from March of 2025 that you put out, Veteran Perceptions Survey Results and Policy Recommendations. Tell us what the start of this was.
Yeah, so we partnered with an organization called Mission Roll Call to do the study in Ipsos, the big surveying company, because honestly, it actually is a great dovetail from what we were talking about previously, which is frustration with where the government is spending money. And honestly, I've been very frustrated with the House and Senate Veterans Affairs committees and their unwillingness to make change, even though the system continues to fail. And so it dawned on me that some of the best work being done in Congress is being done by the Senate and House Armed Services committees. And the question was, hey, is veteran well-being a national security issue? And if it is, perhaps we could get these committees involved in it and we could actually get some progress. And so we commissioned the study to determine that. And, at a time of historically bad recruiting results, so there's a study called Jammers, C.O.D.E does every year. They've been doing it since 1983. So for, 40 plus years, they assess the willingness to serve amongst high school students and of their key influencers, teachers, parents, coaches, to recommend service. And there's only one time in 40 years where this number has been that low, and that was during the surge in Iraq when body bags were coming home every day, right? It's at the lowest level it's been during that period. And we wanted to say, hey, have the legacies of 20 years of war, as seen through public sentiment about our veterans, negatively impacted recruiting in an unprecedented way. So in other words, if the public thinks bad things happen to you if you join the military and become a veteran, is that part of the reason, even though it's not a reason that DoD has ever cited, is that part of the reason we're having a hard time recruiting? And unfortunately, the answer is yes. That's what the study told us. The traditional explanations of why recruiting's struggling, it's the bad economy or it's a good economy, kids are out of shape, there's a samurai culture where only sons and daughters of those who serve join, etc. They just something different happening here, because as I said, there aren't body bags coming home regularly. So what's going on here? And so, the bottom line is we found out that 67% of parents and 55% of the general population is unlikely or very unlikely to recommend military service.
Yeah, these stats out of this survey really drive this point home. I'll tell you, I was surprised that educators were more likely to recommend service than parents or the general population. I wouldn't have guessed that. So that, there's information in this survey of, I think it was over 1,000 people.
Yep.
That helps again shape your views on policies and actions based on data versus feelings. So that is one that surprised me. And some of the answers by Americans about, well, if you get out of the military, you're damaged, surprised me as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the good news in a sea of bad news is what you honed in on is educators. There's a great opportunity with educators. They're better informed and they're more willing to be even better informed. There's a receptiveness with them towards military service, and if they are better informed, they're the most likely to recommend service. So for DoD, it's very clear that's where their efforts need to focus. It's twofold, right? It's one, actually driving better outcomes for veterans, and then two, educating the public. There's all kinds of misperceptions out there. We did a whole social media campaign of sort of, truth versus reality. So, like 70% of respondents thought veterans are economically unstable, but Pew Center research shows that median household income for veterans is actually significantly higher than non-veteran households. Or 2/3 of respondents thought veterans aren't productive in the workplace, where Gartner research actually showed that veterans are 4% more productive in the workplace. And they looked across 1 million Fortune 500 employees. Or, this perception that civilians don't care about veteran well-being. Actually, they do. 90% of them showed strong support for improving federal programs. The list goes on, but like mental health, let's talk about that for a second. 80% of respondents thought veterans aren't mentally healthy, but according to the Journal of Healthcare, veterans have lower rates of mental health issues than non-veterans. This is one example. So there's all these misperceptions out there.
Yeah, some of this is related. Some of this is related to our entertainment business, right? Whether it's TV or movies, unless the veteran comes home damaged, the story doesn't seem to have an arc to it. And I find this very frustrating when you hear like what the statistics you just reported. And I think in past I've heard from folks that veterans have a higher percentage of home ownership, which is where stability and wealth gets generated for a family than non-veterans. And so, yeah, busting some of these perceptions is very hard work, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's the old, the truth, a lie goes around the world twice before the truth gets its shoes on, right? So it's, on your home ownership point, 65%, 2/3 of respondents thought vets don't own their own homes. The census data shows that 80% of veterans own their own homes as compared to 60% of non-veterans. That's a huge generational wealth creation vehicle that is something you could market for recruitment and dispel that myth, but we're not investing in it at all, which is a huge mistake in my judgment.
I'd agree. And we're talking to President of Call of Duty Endowment, Dan Goldenberg, U.S. Navy captain, retired. Dan, the other area I wanted to touch on before we run way out of time is there's a lot of positive news in this study that you did and published back in March. The idea that young people would benefit from connecting with veterans and hearing their experiences was really highly regarded. And there's a whole list of things where, like, it seems like it's the opposite. You heard all these horror stories about veterans. You get to this set of questions, and it's like, oh, yeah, these are really good people. We want to have more interaction with them.
Yeah, look, the problem we're up against is this. Our society still respects the military and veterans to a high degree. But it's kind of like this. It's like, I respect veterans. I admire them. I applaud them. I'll donate to them. I just don't want my kid, my player on my team, my student to go be one of them. Because if they do, bad things are going to happen to them. That's what we're up to dispelling. At the same time, to your point about good news, there's a huge willingness across parents, teachers, coaches, and students to learn about the veteran community, to meet veterans that we, again, don't really take advantage of. The best recruiters, Jim, are not wearing a uniform and sitting in a recruiting station.
No.
They're you and me. They're people whose lives are better because of their service. And, DoD really does very little to activate us. Can you, if we thought about veterans for a minute as alumni of the military, could you imagine a successful university that didn't use their alumni to attract candidates? Like, it's unthinkable, right?
Yeah, excellent point.
Successful but yet we it starts a transition where they can't get you out the door fast enough once you say you want to leave. We don't prepare them well to be successful. And then even those people like you or me, the best decision I ever made in my life. My wife winces whenever I say that, but I remind her if I hadn't made that decision, I never would have met her. So,
if you'd gone to West Point, you would have dated one of those high school girls.
That's true. Oh my gosh. But ultimately, veterans are an incredible asset, for this problem that needs to be tapped into, for sure.
So let's go to the 4 key recommendations that the Veteran Perception Survey results generated, and this was done sponsored with Call of Duty Endowment and Mission Roll Call. Talk to us about the recommendations.
Yeah, 4 recommendations. The first is accountability drives performance. We need to make this massive $340 billion federal spend on veterans accountable to results. Right now, they simply are not. What gets measured gets done. There's no system in place to track, to update the American taxpayer on how this money is being spent, why it's being spent, and what kind of results we're getting. And we think if there's sunshine, will really help that. Again, that's one of those things I was hoping DOGE might drive, or government accountability efforts would. We'll see. Second, it's so clear, year after year, our grantees, the Call of Duty Endowment grantees, since 2022, we've been placing more veterans in jobs than the federal government. That's staggering for a fraction of the price.
It's staggering, but it's also sad.
It is very sad. There's no accountability there. And so after years, and I've got 12 years of quarterly data showing this, it's time to redirect the federal government funding for employment to the nonprofits that have a proven track record of doing a better job. That's the second, redirect these government funds to proven nonprofits that can deliver better results. And honestly, we could probably get to full employment for veterans and give money back to the government when it was all said and done. You're talking about $150 to $180 million a year. And for half that price, we could probably, through nonprofits, get to full employment. The third point is, and this starts to get to helping the truth get its shoes on, is launching a national veteran awareness campaign. So little of recruitment efforts focus on the good things that happen to you through your military service after you take the uniform off. We need a national campaign focused on that, highlighting the great economic outcomes, the health outcomes, all the family outcomes that actually do happen through military service. And that includes involving the veteran community in this. And then finally, a great opportunity, this is a more tactical recommendation, but worth noting, because you picked it out, was that we have a great opportunity DOD has a great opportunity to focus on educating high school staff. If they educate them on the actual great results veterans get by and large, and on the things we're doing to improve, they're likely to get an extended recruiting force from teachers and high school staff.
Yeah, it's a force multiplier if you do that right.
Perfect way to describe it.
Before we come to the end, and I told Dan at the outset here, I've been following Call of Duty Endowment for a number of years, and this is a great first opportunity to talk with them. Dan, where's the future go? What does the endowment do on a going forward basis? What's the plans?
So first of all, right now, because of the government cuts, I think a very timely thing we have to think about is we estimate over 80,000 veterans have lost their job in federal employment in the last 2 to 3 months. 80,000. That's a tidal wave of unemployed veterans. And if you think about it, I think we want the narrative that some people pitch is that, these are low performing bureaucrats. But if you look into it, it's actually not true. The vast majority of these people were probationary employees.
Right.
Relatively new hires to the government, or people who were recently promoted. So literally what the folks are getting rid of, those who are easy to get rid of, which are, new hires who are excited to come start their job and serve. They're not jaded bureaucrats. And those who are your top performers who got promoted. These are great potential hires. And yet the kind of resources, not great as they are, that transitioning service members have, like TAP, those are not open to these employees. There's no systemic program to help them. And they need help because even if they've been working in government for 10, 20 years, the things you do to get hired and promoted in government are very different than the private sector. Our resources in the Call of Duty Endowment are open to them, and we'd love to get the word out to them. It doesn't matter how long ago you took off the uniform. If you served, we're here to help. So that's an area we're keenly focused on. Getting better data, as we discussed, that's another area. And then the third area is really, quite frankly, getting that government funding, federal government funding, away from the Department of Labor to, not to us, but to our grantees, so they can do more great work for a much lower cost for the veteran community.
If you're a veteran out there and maybe you lost your job in that federal purge and you want to know more about Call of Duty Endowment and maybe get pointed to a nonprofit grantee of the endowment, how do folks learn more about the endowment and how do they plug in?
Yeah, so they go to callofdutyendowment.org and click on veteran support, and we'll connect them with our highest performing grantees who are most appropriate for their situation.
Well, we really appreciate the time you've given us today, Dan Goldenberg, U.S. Navy Captain retired, president of Call of Duty Endowment, and we're really thrilled to talk about the data that you're generating so that decisions can be made on that versus feelings. And certainly you're having a great impact, and we encourage all the work that you're doing. Thanks for your time today.
Hey, thank you, Jim. It was a real pleasure.
We just want to remind you that Veterans Radio podcasts are available on all your favorite streaming platforms, including RSS.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Rees Across America Radio. So wherever you are, you can find us, whether it's on your mobile phone or your computer or your laptop, your tablet. But listen in to Veterans Radio Podcasts. We post something new every week, and you're going to find it informative. And I want to thank everybody for listening to Veterans Radio today. I am Jim Fausone. It's been a pleasure to be your host. I'm a veterans disability lawyer at Legal Help for Veterans, and you can reach us at 800-693-4800 or legalhelpforveterans.com on the web. You can follow Veterans Radio on Facebook and listen to its podcasts and internet radio shows by visiting us at veteransradio.org. That's veteransradio.org. We again want to thank our national sponsors, the National Veterans Business Development Council, nvbdc.org, Legal Help for Veterans, a veterans disability law firm with a national practice before the VA, can help you on your claims and your appeals. It can be reached at legalhelpforveterans.com or 1-800-693-4800. And PuroClean, a leader in property emergency services. It's the paramedics of property damage, providing water damage remediation, flood water removal, fire and smoke damage remediation, mold and biohazard cleanups. You can reach them at puroclean.com or 800-775-7876. We also want to thank our local sponsors. This would include the Charles S. Kettles chapter of the Vietnam Veterans of America, that's chapter 310, VFW Graf O'Hara Post 423, the American Legion Irwin Preskin Post 46 in Ann Arbor as well, the VA Ann Arbor Healthcare System, and certainly the National Vietnam Veterans of America Association. You can be a sponsor by going to veteransradio.org, clicking on the About Us and our sponsors, and help us out. Keep this program alive for the 21 and 22 years. Keep us going for another 20. Thank you.